For months, governments have been working behind the scenes to secure supplies of potential COVID-19 vaccines. They've been placing advance orders with drug makers in the hope that at least one of the shots will work. Now, the European Commission says it will give €400 million to a global effort to make these vaccines available to all nations, whether they're rich or poor.
This contribution will help buy and deliver doses of future vaccines for low and middle-income countries. In parallel, we continue negotiating with pharmaceutical companies to purchase doses of vaccines on behalf of the EU member states. Because one thing is clear: we will not be safe until everyone, whether here in Europe or out there in the world, is safe. We need global solidarity.
Well, let's head straight to the Belgian capital now, where we can speak to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, tell us, how is this money going to be spent?
Well, first of all, as we all know, looking at those coronavirus spikes in many European countries, Tokes, clearly the only way this crisis is probably going to come to an end is with a vaccine, and that is why there is a bit of a race on, essentially, amongst pharmaceuticals and countries to try and get a vaccine that it is effective as soon as possible. And what the EU are trying to do with this €400 million is essentially to try and aid that process. Now, it is in conjunction with COVAX. That is a joint venture between the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations and the World Health Organization. It was set up in April by the French President, Bill and Melania Gates, and also by the Director General of the WHO. And what they're trying to do essentially is to give funding to various different pharmaceutical companies to try and find a vaccine, because clearly lots of them are going to have to invest in what they think might work, which in the end may not. And this money is to try and essentially encourage that process. With this funding, part of a wider funding pledge that plans to buy, 2 billion vaccines by the end of 2021.
Darren, as you say there, this was set up by Emmanuel Macron and the Bill Gates Foundation. So why is the bloc only joining this effort now?
Well, because there are two things here at play. First of all, as Ursula von der Leyen alluded to there, this €400 million is in addition to the €16 billion that the European Union has already set aside. Now, that €16 billion is essentially, again, to aid pharmaceutical companies to find a virus, but one that would only be made available to essentially EU citizens. Because there is a fear that if the vaccine is developed in one particular country, that essentially that country will try and provide it only to their own citizens first of all, and that they may well then obviously jack up the price essentially to make it more difficult for other countries. So that 60 billion is for all EU citizens to try and help spread out essentially the cost so that anyone on the continent has access to a vaccine if they need it. But this 400 million is specifically for low and middle income countries. And the thought process behind that is that essentially this pandemic, this crisis, this global crisis will not be over until we're all protected against the coronavirus. There's no point in providing it to particular populations in particular parts of the world. Everyone needs to avail of it in order for the global crisis to come to an end. And this, in a sense, is the EU trying to play its part in that, as Ursula von der Leyen called it, a global effort.
That race for a vaccine very much now on. Our political editor there, Darren McCaffrey, with the latest from Brussels. Thank you.